Today, my mom slipped on ice and broke her ankle. The person whose house she fell in front of came out and yelled at us when I came to help, saying I wasn't her son and how dare I use his driveway. Reddit, what moments have you had where you just thought, what is wrong with you? Title pretty much says it all. My mom slipped and it looks like her ankle is broken. I got there to help, pulled my car into his driveway to back it up next to her on the street, and he came out and yelled at us. My mom told him that I'm her son and she called me to help, and he just kept yelling about how he saw us from his roof and wondering what I was doing using his driveway. After that, we just decided to ignore him since we had bigger problems to deal with. But in my mind, I was thinking, why does it matter who I am or why I pulled into your driveway? You can see her on the ground. You can see her screaming in pain. Does it really matter right now? What is wrong with you? Any interesting stories from Reddit about people being just downright idiots about things that don't matter? I was in the car with my grandma on a large 4-lane road in town. A car next to us sideswiped us. Pretty hard, actually. So we pulled over to do the whole information exchange thing. The woman in the other car leaps out and starts screaming at my grandma, saying, "You are the rudest person I've ever seen. You wouldn't let me over. I had my blinker on." I was completely taken aback. My grandma is the sweetest old lady, and had either of us actually seen her blinker, I know Graham would have let her over. But there was heavy traffic, and her car was directly beside us. I dealt with the beast in the Camry and got her insurance. She ended by saying, "This isn't my fault. That woman should let people over." I laughed, which took her aback. I said, "You're 100% at fault here. And by the way, a blinker is not a yield sign, even if we had seen it. Learn how to drive before you hurt or kill someone." Then we left. I was pretty happy when Graham told me her insurance had accepted liability, and the agent told her something to the effect of, quote, "Yes, she yells at us too." Pretty minor compared to a lot of these, but back when I was 13 or so, my cousin and I were at a small town Mardi Gras parade. We found a convenient spot and stood there waiting for the parade to start. About 30 seconds later, a man tapped my cousin on the shoulder and started cussing her and me out big time for, quote, being in his way, freaking kids, no respect these days, raised by TV and single moms, etc. I turned around and saw an empty folding chair about 30 feet from the roadway, presumably his. Yes, people do set out folding chairs to watch parades, but they usually set them up about 5 feet away from the road, not 30. Yes, we were standing in his way, but that's like yelling at someone for skipping you in the grocery line when you're standing in the produce section. Be there or don't. And as simple, "I was here to watch the parade and you're standing in front of me. Could you please find somewhere else?" would have worked. He didn't have to automatically go to "freaking kids with no respect." Out of spite, he got to stare at the backs of our heads for the next half hour instead of the parade. We caught lots of beads. I used to work in a record store, and during one of our busy moments of the day, a coworker started to have a seizure up at the cash registers. I immediately stopped ringing up a customer to go help my coworker and try to figure out what to do. About 2 minutes into helping my coworker, whom everyone could see was needing help, a customer asks if we could hurry up and check them out. I remarked that I'm sorry I was busy helping someone that was having a seizure and they'd have to wait a couple minutes. Of course, the customer gives me an angry, frustrated look and starts back-talking. After I get the situation taken care of, I go to check the customer out, and all they were trying to buy was a CD for 25 cents. Upon the customer leaving, they remarked that they would never come back because of the slow service. Good riddance. That always cracked me up, where Karens or Kevins are yelling at customer service, and they leave saying, "You just lost a customer." Yeah? And? There are thousands more. You're not paying my bills. I don't care. When I was 21, I got my first big kid job, so I decided to buy myself a new, used, car since my clunker was awful. I got a beautiful Pontiac G6. I loved it. Exactly 3 weeks after I bought it, I had to go back to the dealership to sign some paperwork so I could lower my car payment. My mom came with me. I was driving back home, going about 35 miles per hour, minding my own business, and this old man in a Chevy Avalanche, about 80 years old, pulled out of a parking lot right in front of me. Had he floored it, I would have barely missed him if I slammed on my brakes. However, he stopped to make sure nobody was coming from the other direction. I slam on my brakes, blare my horn, then T-bone his truck. The front end of my car was barely there, fluids leaking all over, airbags all in my face. My mom and I both got hurt, and this jerkwad decides to get out of his truck and start screaming at me, asking me why I hit his car, what is wrong with me, etc. I looked like I was all of 16 at the time, so I'm sure he thought he was right in his old brain of his. He kept physically coming toward me, swearing at me, screaming, even when the cop came. Finally, after 10 minutes of screaming, he asked if we were okay, to which my mother went off on him, that we weren't okay and he had no right being on the road. Come to find out, he hadn't had a valid license for a few years. Seriously though, how did he think that I hit him on purpose? I once had a guy tell me that he wasn't subscribed to Am I the Genius or Am I the Jerk linked in the description below, and I was like, what is wrong with people? But seriously, if you like what you're hearing, give us a like and a subscribe. My gran fell on the curb in front of my house when she was getting out of the car and broke her hip. She was lying on the ground crying when she said a stranger passed. My gran asked her to just knock on her front door, and the person just stared at her and kept walking, and my gran waited an hour until my dad came out and found her. What kind of person just stares at a little 80-year-old woman crying on the ground? Screw that person. I once parked my car on the street, completely legally, when visiting a friend. Some guy comes running out of the house yelling at me, saying that was his parking spot. He had a large driveway that could easily park 6 cars, but here he is, yelling at me for parking on the street I was completely and totally, morally and legally entitled to park on. I pointed to the street sign saying it was okay to park, and he yelled, "I don't care what the sign says, you idiot! Move your car or you'll regret it!" I ignored his threat and went to visit my friend. It was a late night, and I came out at about 3 a.m. to drive home, only discovered that someone, wonder who, had let the air out of all my tires. Luckily for me, I own an air compressor, so I hooked it up to my car's cigarette lighter and pumped the air back into my tires. For reference, this post was made 11 years ago, back when more than 2 cars on the road had cigarette lighters. It was cold out and not the greatest compressor in the world, so it was a miserable 20 minutes or so. Once I was done, I returned the favor, letting the air out of all of the tires in the 4 cars in his driveway, as well as his boat trailer. I also superglued his mailbox closed. That made me feel better. I worked at a small, food stand-like place once in Disney World. We closed at 3 every day after lunch, and were right next to another food place that remained open. Well, this day, a man came up to our window at around 3:30. We had already closed everything, and demanded food. I told him nicely that all of our kitchen had been closed, but there's a similar restaurant, literally like 15 yards away, that served the same items. Well, he freaked out, started screaming and complaining about the service in front of his children and a bunch of other kids. He even called one of my coworkers a moron. I know he was fully aware of Disney's policies to never let anyone go unsatisfied. Maybe he'd get free stuff, right? Well, he did. Food and drinks. As he was given his food that came from the neighboring kitchen, I remember I gave him the most "what is wrong with you" look I had ever given, even in risk of losing my job for not looking, quote, Disney happy when around a guest. The part that ticked me off most is that he acted like that in front of his children and was rewarded. He didn't even say thank you. I was managing a restaurant on a busy weekend when the tornado sirens went off and the radio told everyone to take cover immediately. My hosts ran to take cover and call their kids at home. Some jerkwad customer decides to start yelling at me to seat him immediately, that was ridiculous, he didn't need to take cover. A tornado did hit, about a mile away. I was on the bus to a shopping mall and it was very crowded. Upon arriving, people massed for the doors, and when following behind the torrent of people, in my own pace, I suddenly see an old, 70 to 80 years, woman silently frantic, standing in the middle of the massing crowd trying to get the attention of someone, with tears streaming down her face. Everyone in the entire bus just went by her, some pushing, others commenting, but all ignoring. I ask her what's wrong, and she points to the front of the bus where I see a pair of legs sticking out below the bus, in front of the front wheel. I can't pull him out. It's my husband, she cries. Apparently, her very old husband was hit in the head by the mirror of the bus as the couple was waiting to get in, and he was unconscious and bleeding. The bus driver hadn't even noticed anything, so while I checked up on the husband, the bus driver closed the doors and initiated to pull out into traffic. I had to slam the glass really hard to get his attention, and if it wasn't for traffic blocking the road, he would have pulled out regardless, thinking I was just a disgruntled, late, would-be passenger. What sickens me about this experience is that some people are so busy with their own little lives that they are willing to ignore the tears of a crying old helpless lady practically brushing up against them because it might mean that her obvious discomfort might require excessive burdening aid from them that just doesn't fit the planned schedule. What is wrong with some people? Update due to interest. The man was, as far as I know, alright after I had pulled him out as gently as I could and provided basic care. I don't know the term in English, but I put him into a position I learned from first aid courses. He had taken a huge gash in the head, but when the paramedics arrived, they said that I did the right thing and would take care of him now. The paramedics' calmness was either incredibly professional and disconnected or just experienced, but I felt at ease afterwards. Never heard from them. For a while, I worked at a gas station, and most of the time I had to sit in a small building and just watch what went on outside. I was doing a bit of paperwork one day when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. One customer was waving frantically to me, the pump hose in one hand with no nozzle and gas spraying everywhere. I slammed the emergency stop button and alarms started going off everywhere. I ran outside with the absorption powder to try to get this massive spill under control, and at the same time, I was trying to explain to the people that were coming up to me why the pumps weren't working. At this point, I was a bit unconcerned with customer service. My number one priority was to get this dangerous spill under control. The guy who broke the nozzle felt it was a good time to come up to me and tell me, quote, "I need a refund for all that gas." You know, I understood that because the gasoline was shooting out onto the ground instead of his tank. He would eventually need his money back. But while the gasoline is still on the ground and I'm desperately trying to clean it up so that nobody gets hurt, that is not the right time to demand a refund. Fortunately, my manager came out. He had to call the fire department and tell them not to come, and he dealt with this guy and all the people that he felt the need to tell me that they were, quote, "in a hurry and when would the pumps come back on." Every year there's a Greek festival here in Richmond, Virginia, and all the people in the neighborhoods around there get a little angry about it because of all the people parking. But some people take it farther and actually put out obstructions, like chairs with orange tape between them or cones, to block people from parking in front of their house. The problem with this is that it's public parking, so they're really just being crybabies, which is why I like to find some house close to the festival that's done this. I get out of my car, throw the cones into the person's yard, and park right there. Screw them. I'm only going to be at the festival for as long as it takes to get food, because it's usually hot as heck. One time some guy came out screaming at me about how I was breaking the law and he was going to call the cops and have me arrested and my car towed. I just looked at him and said, "No, you won't, because I haven't broken any laws." So I got my food all boxed up, and I'm walking back to my ride, enjoying the heck out of one of the 5 gyros I bought. One for now, one for later, one for later, one for my ex-wife, and one for her later. And I see a cop car blocking me in, and the cop standing on the sidewalk with the jerkwad berating him. Cop had a very tolerant expression on his face, so I just walked up and said, "Hey dude, sorry, officer. I got all my food and I'm ready to head out. I've got the family waiting for dinner," holding up the bags. "Any way you can move the cruiser a few feet and I could be on my way? Or are you going to be busy for a while yet?" The jerkwad's eyes widen and he starts jabbering about how I'm the one and telling the cop to arrest me now, impound my car, on and on. Cop looks at me, gives me a slight nod, and says, "Nope, I'm pretty much done here." "How are the lines?" I'm kinda hungry and the guys back at the station love gyros. So I told him the lines are moving pretty fast and the tzatziki was extra tangy this year. The jerkwad is just gaping at us. So the cop says, "Sir, if you don't take care of this trash by the time I'm done moving my cruiser, I'll have to cite you for littering. And don't block off the street again," and goes to move his cruiser. By the time I'm loading up and pulling out, with the wave to officer cool as heck, the jerkwad is dutifully picking up his cones and orange tape with a stunned expression on his face, like reality just came crashing down. TLDR, jerkwad tried to block off a parking spot. I took it anyway. He called cops. Cop was cool as heck. Told him to pick up the cones or be cited for littering. I left enjoying my victory gyro and loving life. I was standing at a crosswalk of a fairly busy street one day, next to a woman gabbing on a cell phone, and her little 3 to 4-year-old son toddling around. The woman wasn't making any attempt to look at the kid and wasn't holding his hand. The kid, probably bored by waiting, toddled right past me, jumped off the curb, and started walking into the street. As soon as I saw him leaping off the curb, I instinctively shouted, "Oh no," sprang into action, and ran for him. I managed to grab him by the back of the shirt and yank him back to the curb before the SUV whizzed by at 40 to 50 miles an hour. Obviously, they weren't paying attention either. The boy starts sobbing, of course, because what little kid wouldn't? It was scary. I spun around, and immediately, I met with his mom's face as she proceeds to flip out, screaming about how dare I touch her son and how dare I make him cry. I tried to argue and tell her that I just saved the kid's life when he walked out into the road, but even after hearing that, she just kept calling me nasty names and screaming at me. She may not have noticed me wrestling her toddler from a fate of being vaporized into a fine kitty paste, but given the circumstances, shouldn't she have at least given me the benefit of considering that I was telling the truth? She wouldn't stop screaming incoherent garbage at me, while still holding her phone near her face, mind you. Heaven forbid she'd end the call. So eventually, I just shouted back that she should keep a better eye on her son and walk to another crosswalk 2 blocks down. I wasn't expecting a grand hero's parade, but a simple, thanks for not letting my boy become Kinder Jelly would have been nice. Coincidentally, this was near where I lived, and I ended up seeing she and her boy again about 6 months later as they were walking through the neighborhood. She was still on her cell, but this time, the boy was trailing after her on a leash. Lesson learned, I guess? TLDR, I saved a kid from being hit by an SUV. His mom gets angry at me. My friend got hit by a car at an intersection. The girl was speeding. After my friend literally flies over the car and lands on the pavement, the driver pulls over and starts to yell at my friend who got hit. She doesn't even take out her phone to call 911 or anything. She just goes on about how, this is the second accident this month. Why weren't you looking? Do you know how much this will cost me? I was thinking, what is wrong with you, lady? You just hit my friend with your car. Shut up. I especially love the part where she said that this was the second accident this month. I think that's a you problem at that point. Literally, so many accidents are preventable if you just look at the road. My mom has had close encounters with deer at least a dozen times, and she's even hit a couple. But she's aware of her surroundings. It's what prevented her car from being a deer paste factory. On my wife's 30th birthday, my mother sent her a happy birthday e-card in the morning. About an hour later, my wife finds out her grandmother had passed away. She, of course, wasn't in the best of moods after that, so decided to just be alone for a couple of hours. Meanwhile, my mother composed an email to my wife several pages long going on about how rude my wife was for not thanking her for the e-card and how she's always been ungrateful and uncaring towards her. My wife called her and calmly informed my mom of why she hadn't replied to her e-card the very instant she got it, and my mom decides to get angry at me for not calling her right away to tell her not to get angry at my wife. When my mom confronted me about it, I only said, if you don't want to put your foot in your mouth, don't open it. When I was a kid, I whacked my elbow on a door handle. May have ruptured a bursa. Man, it hurt. I was maybe 9, and I was screaming in pain, tears running down my face, sobbing, the whole Steven Spielberg. One of my parents' lifelong friends grabbed, physically restrained, everybody who tried to comfort me, saying, oh, he's at his funny bone. He'll be laughing in a minute. It felt like forever, but I guess it was 5, maybe 10 minutes. I'm curled up in the fetal position, holding the elbow and screaming, and I still remember seeing her grab people's arms to pull them back when they reached towards me. Number 1. On that door handle, there was no way I could have hit my funny bone without warping the space-time continuum. Number 2, who the heck has ever laughed from a shot on that exposed nerve? Anyone? Number 3, how long can an allegedly normal human being listen to a child scream and not only decline to help, but actively stop others from helping? And no, the laughing part never happened. In related news, when I met her 10 years later, she was just as prolific a sour of sorrow as I had remembered. That woman never saw me sober as an adult. Every time she showed up, I checked out of reality until she was gone. I was out walking my dog because at the time she was cooped up a lot and I wanted to let her stretch her legs. We walked from our apartment complex to the neighborhood next door. My dog had already done her business and I, a responsible member of society, picked it up and threw it away. While walking past a house, a woman runs out and starts yelling about getting her gun. I thought for sure I had misunderstood her, so I said, "What?" This causes her to run back inside and bring a large man out with her. "What did you say to my wife?" he yelled. I told him calmly that she came out and yelled at me and I was trying to figure out why she was angry. She begins to scream about how my dog, this is the first time I'd ever walked in this neighborhood, was crapping in her yard and she was going to shoot me if she caught it happening. I assured her that I had never been by her house and I was the only one walking the dog. I pointed out that we weren't even slowing down near the house until she came out and threatened to shoot me. But reasoning with morons doesn't exactly work. So instead, she kept screaming, and her giant husband seemed to be getting more agitated. So I just started walking again and avoided their house on the way back out of the neighborhood. That said, it did inspire a hobby. If my dog dropped a lot of poop, I'd pick it up like normal, put it in a plastic sack, and drive over to their house. If the lights were out and the cars were gone, I'd take the bag and empty it on the lawn, right where they'd likely step out of their car when they returned. I never saw it happen, but I always hoped it played out like I planned. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.